This is Roger Bolton, and I'm here to interview Richard Edelman for the Oral History Series at the Page Center at Penn State University. Richard, you're the CEO of Edelman Public Relations, a firm founded by your father when?
1952.
And what was the world like when he founded this firm, and what was he thinking when it began?
He had the idea that marketing public relations was really the potential larger force even than corporate or public affairs, and he felt that the so-called independent validation by credible third parties would be very important in the marketing process, and ultimately he's been proven very right. His really big idea was the media tour, and he did it for the Tony Company, in which Twin has the Tony, and he toured the Twins, and then he did it for Sara Lee and Lemon and Kentucky Fried Chicken and California Wines, and he was off to the races. But it was an incredibly different time, Roger, because relatively few media, national media in particular, a lot of local media, and it was a time of very high trust in institutions, and it was President Eisenhower, after all. Everything was good and normal, and and also PR people were called publicists, so it wasn't exactly the way in which we're regarded now. So my dad used to have parties of 300 journalists from the Chicago Media Corps at our home, and growing up we would crawl between the legs of the celebrating tipsy reporters.
So
different time.
The firm has changed, the world has changed.
Yeah.
Think about the world in 1952 when your dad founded the firm, and the world today. How would you characterize the difference in the environment in which Edelman operates?
Well, I think first point is advertising was so by far the dominant force in communications, and I don't think that's true anymore. I think that we're absolutely at the table and arguably have a more substantial relationship with senior management than advertising. Advertising is a functional, tactical skill, and public relations is a strategic and counseling as well as execution. And so, the way I describe it is moving from the sort of tail of the dog to the brain of the dog. Also, you've had the evolution of media in such a substantial way with the dispersion of authority into social media, into companies with so-called owned media with their own channel on YouTube or whatever. You clearly also have very important blogs that like Politico or TechCrunch or TechMeme that are setting the agenda, and that's a big change. And then last is sort of this emergence of civil society, the rise of NGOs, really in the last decade. And when you see this from the Edelman Trust Barometer, where NGOs are now much more trusted than either business or government, they've sort of sponged up the loss of trust in those two mainstream institutions. And they're really the fifth estate in global governance. So, it's business with civil society now, and it's not just in opposition to.
So, your dad founded the firm with a focus on marketing PR. As you came into the business in New York, there was this kind of move into crisis PR and more of the corporate kinds of issues. You've just described an environment in which the agenda is being set by new kinds of media and new kinds of institutions, the emergence of civil society and NGOs. What does Edelman today look like in terms of its business mix, and where's the growth and where's the focus?
So we're still probably 60% marketing and 40% corporate and public affairs. But the way we look at marketing is really much different than the sort of small box that we used to occupy, which was you take the advertising creative and make something of it. So when Morris the Cat ran for president, and that was the basis of the ads for the Heinz brand. We took Morris on tour and had street rallies and all kinds of things, but we basically took the creative. Now let's compare that to what we're doing for eBay at the moment, where we said, we want to be the authority on fashion, because eBay is ultimately the destination for properly priced fashion products. We've created a whole concept called the Inside Source. We hired a woman who had been at Lucky Magazine. She's a genius on fashion trends. She looks through the eBay site every day, and she basically posts her views on the 5 or 10 best deals of the day. And then from that, we are able to use that cross cell phone, almost RSS kind of feed. We also put that up into people's PCs because we have this on the eBay site, and if people are trolling, they can go right to Inside Source and get the advice of the day. So in a sense, we've created own media for eBay. It's a completely different approach. Also, pop-up store we've done for the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas to literally manifest what is available digitally at the eBay store, but to also understand that consumers need to see this, and that mainstream media needs to see it. So the sort of pinging back and forth between what is mainstream and what is social media is a very interesting further approach.
Yeah.
But even also in marketing of a healthcare product such as Ally for GlaxoSmithKline, which helps you reduce weight, the marketing challenge for that is as much dealing with medical opinion leaders, establishing appropriate use guidelines for consumers, what to and what not to eat, as it is doing classic, get on the Today Show. You must do both. You must establish a foundation of scientific strength, if I can put it that way, that allows you the license to operate into the mainstream media. So I actually look at PR now in the marketing side as, in a sense, creating the runway that allows the advertising plane to take off. Because without the base of support with opinion formers, and even actually the new influencers, could be diabetic moms or any other activist types, you're going to lose.
Advertising is clearly a tactic, as you described earlier, and one that is less effective without the PR landing strip that you just described. Marketing arguably is a strategic discipline and function in corporations. Do you see a trend to convergence of marketing and corporate communications or corporate public relations? And if so, driven at least in part by the digital realities?
But it's also driven by a change in expectation of business. Roger, I think you see that it's now business in society. Mm-hmm. The whole theory of Milton Friedman, which is the sole social responsibility of businesses to make profit, is now being eclipsed by Indra Nooyi, for instance, of PepsiCo, talking about performance and purpose. It's both. Mm-hmm. And so business thinks of itself in a stakeholder mentality instead of just a shareholder. So the reaction by companies is very interesting, where you see a chief communications officer, John Iwata, moving also now to take on marketing. Mm-hmm. So he comes not out of, in a sense, brand management, as much as he does with reputation management. Right. So he's put the two together, and I think that the program IBM does on the planet is brilliant, mm-hmm. because it puts IBM at tables where they are convener, they are intellectual capital creator, and they're not just selling boxes and software. Right. It's a whole other way of selling. And then you have a person like Leslie Dock at Walmart, who's in the sort of top 7 people in the firm, who is pushing Walmart to be the change agent in environment through supply chain leverage. And I think that's, again, indicative of this merging of brand and corporate reputation.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as kind of current trends in public relations agency relationships with corporate entities, are your clients more the marketing people or the corporate communications people or both? And how is that relationship evolving and working?
Edelman's always had strong relationships with the marketing side of the house, so that we are tied to the CMO is nothing new for us. What is new is that the PR executive, the Roger Bolton of Aetna days, wants a firm to be involved as counseling on global issues, on NGOs, on areas, employee engagement, on things that may be outside of core strength of classic PR director, and wants particularly the global aspect to be on call. So when CEO visits China, what's going to be expected, how to do, what to do, and what basis to have made sure that you've covered, which think tanks to have seen, what intellectual capital should we have developed, what speeches. A lot of that used to be solely internal. And I see more of that now being, in a sense, a shared responsibility between the PR firm and the corporate center.
Strategic partnership?
It's much more a strategic partnership, that's right. It's not a, I use the agency only for arms and legs. Mm-hmm. It's, look, give me your thinking, give me your connections, give me your wisdom, what do you see out there? And that's really rewarding, It's much better than when I started in the biz, mm-hmm. Absolutely.
1952, 1997, I think.
Yeah.
We're now in 2010. Imagine we're in 2025. Can you take a stab at what the world might look like as it continues to evolve? What do you see?
Well, I think some of this is straightforward, which is that the power of India, China, Brazil, maybe Russia, will be enhanced. You'll see a continued shift. I think the FT500 10 years ago had only 25 companies from developing nations. As of this year, it's 125 of the 500. Maybe it's half by then, or maybe it's close to half. Mm-hmm. So we have to move our mentality to be able to hub business from Sao Paulo or Beijing, not just service business. It's a big change. I think second, we are absolutely going to have to make digital core to how people practice our business. It can't be, call in Edelman digital. That's nice, but everyone has to appreciate the impact of having a Twitter embassy or other techniques that are necessary for connecting corporations in digital world. Third, I think the battle is still being decided about whether it's business and society or whether it's just business for shareholders, and the extent of relationship between business and government and how this is going to play out. Whether this is a short wave amplitude where there's heavy government or whether it's long wave as in the 1930s, I can't tell you. That it seems that the populace doesn't like it to have so much government. They see business as the wealth creator, but if that's the case, business is going to have to re-earn their trust, and they're going to have to behave differently. And whether it's issues of compensation or of giving back to community, either philanthropically or products that are better for, I think that's probably the way it'll go. Business having the leeway, but in a higher expectation context. Mm-hmm.
And many business leaders aren't prepared to cede control in that way, or don't have the understanding of the trends or the background to be able to trust the letting go as a way of building trust.
I think that they're starting to see object lessons in the success of that letting go. And letting the middle part of the company speak up. And a company that historically you would have thought of as highly controlled, Microsoft, they have, I think, 20,000 people blogging one way and another. It's a huge change maker for them and allows a discussion as opposed to a talk at. And I think there's genius in that. And similarly, you see a change in mentality at a GE or a Walmart, and as icons do it, people at others say, well, maybe we should be doing the same. And then also, certain brands, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, for which we do work, they've really led in social media. They had, I don't know, a couple 100,000 friends on Facebook. They did a contest where they said, please, crowd, tell us which flavors, here are ingredients you can play with, make it on your home stove, come back to us, we'll commercialize it if it works. They jumped to 1 million friends on Facebook within 6 weeks. And they commercialized one of the products, and it's become a big seller. And the point is, involve people with your brand. And they had an advantage, right? Because they had a history of eco and
right.
Sourcing appropriately, but they've changed their mentality completely.
This is the people like me phenomenon?
Yes.
Do you want to explain that?
Sure. Well, we found, starting 4 or 5 years ago, that a person like yourself is a very important source of credible information. So, you and I both like theater. If I were, thinking about, whether to go to a Shakespeare festival, I'd definitely send you an email, much more than rely upon local media or other, because I know because you've lived your life in it. So that's what has evidenced itself, in a sense, in Facebook, where a sort of peer recommendation leads to 6 times more likely to buy than if it was just a ad on Facebook.
And many business leaders aren't prepared to seed control in that way, or don't have the understanding of the trends or the background to be able to trust the letting go as a way of building trust.
I think that they're starting to see object lessons in the success of that letting go, and letting the middle part of the company speak up. And a company that historically you would have thought of as highly controlled, Microsoft, they have, I think, 20,000 people blogging one way and another. It's a huge change maker for them and allows a discussion as opposed to a talk at. And I think there's genius in that. And similarly, you see a change in mentality at a GE or a Walmart, and as icons do it, people at others say, well, maybe we should be doing the same. And then also, certain brands, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, for which we do work, they've really led in social media. They had, I don't know, a couple 100,000 friends on Facebook. They did a contest where they said, please, crowd, tell us which flavors, here are ingredients you can play with, make it on your home stove, come back to us, we'll commercialize it if it works. They jumped to 1 million friends on Facebook within 6 weeks. And they commercialized one of the products, and it's become a big seller. And the point is, involve people with your brand. And they had an advantage, right? Because they had a history of eco and
right.
Sourcing appropriately, but they've changed their mentality completely.
This is the people like me phenomenon?
Yes.
Do you want to explain that?
Sure. Well, we found, starting 4 or 5 years ago, that a person like yourself is a very important source of credible information. So, you and I both like theater. If I were, thinking about, whether to go to a Shakespeare festival, I'd definitely send you an email, much more than rely upon local media or other, because I know because you've lived your life in it. So that's what has evidenced itself, in a sense, in Facebook, where a sort of peer recommendation leads to 6 times more likely to buy than than if it was just a ad on Facebook.
So it is possible for an industry or even an individual company to build integrity through those things.
I think so. And it's also possible for a country. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've seen the reputation of the United States recover substantially. The Obama effect is real. Arguably, he's more popular ex than in the United States.
What about the profession itself, public relations, and its reputation, and this kind of disdain for spin and disdain for public relations counseling in the broader media? How do you view that?
Well, I think over time, it's a really important problem for those of us in the business to address. And I think, we've allowed ourselves to be categorized by movies like Wag the Dog, and we're this sort of shadowy force, the sort of unaccountable, almost dirty tricksters with a sort of Washington heritage that people inherently don't like. And we have an obligation, I think, to point up our work as catalysts in creating and forging relationships between civil society and business, in helping to promote the eco-imagination kinds of programs that a GE does. I mean, a Beth Comstock is a change agent for global business. She, on her own, with the backing of her chairman and CEO, has made a major change. Leslie Dock again at Walmart, the same kind of profound change on business. And we, as an industry, need to tell those stories because, they've had as much impact as any advertising or other executive in the last 5 years. There are people,
yes.
and we need to lay claim to those.
Right.
And listen, frankly, it's harder for PR agencies to do that because we always work for client, but the client should take the credit for that. Some of the work you did at Aetna was absolutely essential on financial literacy, on understanding your ability in health to speak back to your healthcare provider. I mean, again, you brought wisdom from your prior life in Washington, so sensitivity to those sorts of things.